everybody. Today we are going to start talking about our next unit, which is photosynthesis. So today is going to be a little introduction. We're going to learn some of the ins and outs of photosynthesis and how it is different from cell respiration. So let's go ahead and get started. So photosynthesis, life from light and air. So that is really the key here, is that we get life from light and from air, and those two things are going to combine in plants to help make some organic compounds. All life needs a constant input of energy. So heterotrophs, like animals, heterotrophs' input of energy is going to be found in the food that they eat. Heterotrophs get their energy from eating others. So a heterotroph eats food, and that's other organisms, and we break down the organic molecules that make up those organisms. So heterotrophs are also known as consumers because they consume their energy. Heterotrophs make their energy through respiration, which we already know about. An autotroph, auto means different, and troph refers to energy. So this is these are things that produce their own energy, energy from self. Autotrophs are known as producers because they need to convert the energy of the sun into organic compounds, into the energy that they will use. So autotrophs have to build organic molecules from CO2, basically. So plants are going to make energy and synthesize sugars through photosynthesis. And look at what's happening there. The autotrophs make the organic molecules, and that arrow is showing that the heterotrophs are going to eat those organic molecules that are made by plants. So consumers rely on producers. So how are they connected? Well, heterotrophs make energy by ingesting organic molecules from others. We have the chemical reaction, the chemical equation of cell respiration there, showing that glucose, which is our stand-in for food, obviously all food is not glucose, but we are going to assume that it's going to be similar in nature. We need oxygen, and of course we get our ATP from that reaction. The carbon from the food goes to form carbon dioxide, and that is oxidation. Autotrophs make their energy from light. So here is the equation for photosynthesis. Notice how it's connected to the equation for cell respiration. It's backwards, basically, right? That autotrophs are going to take carbon in the air and they are going to fix it into glucose with the help of light energy and water. So it says reduction, right? It is the opposite type of a reaction. So this is a reduction reaction. So where's the ATP in autotrophs? Well, the ATP is not going to be used to make organic molecule. Instead, plants use light. So what does it mean to be a plant? Well, a plant needs to collect light energy. All right? And then the plant has to transform that light energy into chemical energy. That chemical energy is going to be ATP. It then has to store it. And it has to store it in a way that is stable and can be stored for a while. So basically, transforming it into chemical energy is tough because ATP gets used right away. So if we want to store that light energy, we can't use ATP. Instead, we need to use something else, glucose in this case. Plants also need to get their building blocks from the environment, which is what they do. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then some nitrogen, some phosphorus, a little bit of potassium and sulfur and magnesium. All of these things must be obtained from the environment, but plants don't eat, remember. The CO2 comes from the air. The H and the O comes from water. The other minerals are going to come from the solution in the soil. They're usually absorbed from the soil. And then the plant is going to take all of these things to produce organic molecules needed for growth. And those are the organic molecules there. So the way a plant is situated, first, a plant has to obtain raw materials. So it has to collect things from the sun, like light. It has to collect light from the sun. And the leaves are good at that. So leaves are going to be like the solar panels of the plant. CO2 also has to be collected. And within the leaves, we have these tiny openings called stomata. Stomata are present in leaves, and they help exchange gases. So it helps CO2 go into the plant, and it helps some oxygen leave the plant. Water has to be collected. We already know that comes from the roots. Nutrients also have to be collected, and those nutrients are also going to be taken in from the roots, as we learned before. So here we have some pictures showing a leaf. This is a cross section of a leaf on the upper left. It's showing that the leaf is not totally filled with cells. It's a little spongy, which means there's empty area in there for air. On the bottom of leaves are these stomata right here. It looks kind of like an eye, and it will actually open and close to let air in or to block air from entering. So the stomata have this process where they can open and close to let in CO2. It also lets out water vapor. And of course, that can be a problem for some plants because if a plant is in a hot, dry area, it doesn't want to let a lot of water vapor out. So the stomata is actually like a double-edged sword. It lets CO2 in, but it also lets water vapor out. So it has to time correctly how it wants to do that. Chloroplasts are found in the leaves. They look like this. So they are a green organelle that is filled with these flat discs. These flat discs are called thylakoids. So there's a chloroplast. And the chloroplasts are filled with a green pigment called chlorophyll. So there's our chloroplast absorbing light. And also CO2 is going to diffuse into the chloroplast, giving the chloroplast everything it needs to undergo photosynthesis. All right. So here is a chloroplast, and here is what happens inside of it. So we have a light. Light is hitting the green part of the chloroplast called the thylakoid. Notice there's molecules of chlorophyll on it. Water has to enter a thylakoid as well. And look at what's happening here. Oxygen is leaving, so oxygen is released. We have something called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is going to help produce some things. The Calvin cycle needs CO2, and it is going to make sugars with the help of ATP and with the help of NADPH. So we actually divide up photosynthesis into two different reactions. There is the light reactions. These are the reactions that require light, right? That is why that photon of light is written in. And then there are the light-independent reactions. These don't require light, although they do require some of the things made by the light reactions. A chloroplast, like a mitochondria, has a double membrane, outer membrane and an inner membrane. It has what's called stroma. This is the fluid-filled interior. So there's the stroma filling up the remainder of the chloroplast. Then we have these thylakoids, which are discs. There's one thylakoid. The stacks of thylakoids are called grana. And the thylakoid membrane then is going to contain those pigments called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll are pigments that collect the sun's energy. It's also what makes the thylakoid green. The thylakoids make then the chloroplast look green, which makes the entire plant look green. The thylakoid membrane contains an electron transport chain. You've heard of that before, so there's going to be another one of those very similar to the one from cell respiration. It's also going to contain an ATP synthase. Again, you've seen that before. Chloroplast. And then we have the smaller component inside of it. This is the thylakoid. The ATP synthase is going to be involved. The ATP synthase, what it's going to do is it is going to help deal with a buildup of protons inside the thylakoid. You can already kind of predict how it's going to work. That ATP synthase will help that buildup diffuse out, producing some ATP. So we will find out more about that later. But you can see here that some of the things from cell respiration have been used here, right? This is, instead of making a whole new process, photosynthesis and cell respiration, they share things, they share processes. So it wasn't invented anew. It's more efficient to work with something you've already got. So the ATP synthase and the ETC are examples of that. All right. Photosynthesis is made up of two different reactions. The first one is the light reactions, which should be called the light-dependent reactions because they depend on light. These are the energy conversion reactions. The light reactions take light energy and convert it into something chemical. Specifically, the light reactions make ATP and NADPH. And you see that right here. The light reaction makes NADPH. What is NADPH? It's very, very similar to NADH. Again, we're using the same template. It is slightly different. When you see the P, think of plants or photosynthesis. It's the same deal. It's just a slightly different structure. ATP is the same as always. ATP works the same way. They are created by the light reactions. So the light hits the thylakoids, and somehow, in a series of steps we'll learn about later, NADPH, an electron carrier, is created. ATP energy is created, and these two things are going to help run the Calvin cycle. Meanwhile, the light reactions need some water, and they produce oxygen. So NADPH is money in the bank. The Calvin cycle then is going to happen in the stroma, and it is a light-independent reaction because the Calvin cycle itself does not require light. We sometimes refer to it as the dark reactions, but that is not true. It doesn't need to be in the dark to work. The Calvin cycle is the sugar-building reactions, and that's because it uses the chemical energy from the light reactions, which is ATP and NADPH, and it takes those two things with the help of carbon dioxide in the air, and it makes sugar. And that is the whole point of photosynthesis, is to make sugar. So the light reactions are going to require an electron transport chain, and it's very similar to what's in cell respiration. There are proteins in the membrane of the thylakoids. There are electron acceptors involved. NADPH, similar to NADH. We have a proton gradient. Instead of in the intermembrane space, the proton gradient is going to exist on the inside of the thylakoid. And there is an ATP synthase, as we mentioned before. So there are a lot of similarities between the electron transport chain of cell respiration and photosynthesis. And there we have that thylakoid again, the ATP synthase working in a similar way. It's slightly different, but it's the same idea. All right, here's the electron transport chain of cell respiration. It is found in a mitochondria, as you already know. And we are transferring the chemical energy from food to ATP here. We use the electron carrier NADH in cell respiration. Again, this is cell respiration. This is not photosynthesis. All right. In photosynthesis, the electron transport chain is going to be found in the chloroplast. And it is going to transform light energy into chemical energy this time. So a little different. It's going to use the electron carrier NADPH. And it's going to generate oxygen. So the electron transport chain of photosynthesis is going to make O2. The ATP synthesis is going to operate in a very similar way. Of course, we are transferring energy from a different source, sunlight versus glucose. However, whether it's glucose, whether it's sunlight, we are moving electrons we are running a pump, so hydrogen ions are getting pumped. We are building a gradient in a small space, intermembrane space for respiration, inside the thylakoid for photosynthesis, and it is going to drive the flow of protons through the ATP synthase, which will work in the same way. It's going to bond phosphate to ADP to make ATP. And there we have it. And evolution, it used this same process for both of these different series of chemical reactions. What pigments are needed for photosynthesis? Well, we are going to use chlorophyll in photosynthesis. So chlorophyll is going to have a magnesium in the middle. You can see it's kind of a big molecule. There are other pigments besides chlorophyll. So as you know, all plants are not just green. They can be many different colors, and that's due to a variety of pigments. The most common pigment, though, is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is embedded in the membranes of the thylakoids, and they're arranged in what is called a photosystem, a light system, which is just a collection of chlorophyll molecules joined close together. And so we have a structure-function relationship here with chlorophyll coming together on a membrane. Okay. A look at light. We are specifically for photosynthesis going to be worried about visible light. Visible light is what chloroplasts are going to collect. They do not collect each wavelength equally. Typically, chloroplasts are good at collecting red and blue light, not so much green. So photosynthesis gets its energy by absorbing certain wavelengths of light. Chlorophyll is a pigment that is going to absorb lots of red and blue, and it's not going to absorb very much green. So if we look at chlorophyll A in the graph here, chlorophyll A absorbance is high in the bluish purple area, very low when it comes to green. That means it's not absorbing green at all, and then high again in red. Chlorophyll B, a little different but similar. It's highest in blue, and it's also somewhat high in orange, very low in green. So both of these pigments, because they are reflecting lots of green, are going to appear to be green. Now, some of them are going to be more yellow-green, some of them are going to be more blue-green, but it's still basically green. There are other pigments called carotenoids, generally, that are going to absorb slightly different wavelengths of light. Here's one that's going to absorb a little bit more into the green spectrum. And this one is not going to appear green, it's going to appear more yellow. Accessory pigments with different structures absorb light of different wavelengths. Here we see a chlorophyll molecule embedded in this thylakoid. The light is hitting it. Green gets reflected, so it appears to be green. The other colors are absorbed, so we don't see them. Chlorophyll A is an example. Chlorophyll B is another example. Carotenoids can be many different colors, xanthophylls as well. All right. Okay, there are two photosystems in a thylakoid membrane. Photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. So they are named the way that they are based on what they absorb. One contains mostly chlorophyll A, one contains mostly chlorophyll B, and they are going to absorb slightly different wavelengths of light. You can see that the wavelengths are very similar, but they are slightly different, which is going to make these photosystems appear to be slightly different colors. So they're going to absorb different energies of light. All right. We will talk more about that later. Right? And here is what the electron transport chain looks like. We're going to go through this in detail later, but basically light is going to hit a photosystem, a collection of pigments, and it's going to send an electron moving. But we'll get to the details of that later. So this was your introduction to photosynthesis. Let me know if you have any questions.